Imagine someone who spent 15 years in therapy, who's read every book, done every coaching program, taken the retreats, the courses, the certifications, and who 15 years later still freezes at the same kind of look from their boss, still reacts at the same tone from their partner, still repeats the exact pattern they've been trying to escape since they were children. This is not a rare story. In my consulting room, this is the most common story I hear. The industries that have been built around human transformation, therapy, coaching, self-help, they will show you the 10% who made it through, but they won't show you the silent majority who didn't. And the reason those people didn't get better is not that they failed, it's that the map they were given was incomplete. There is a more complete map, and it was drawn by a Brazilian professor, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'm Isabella Becker. I'm a certified Virtologist, professional translator, and the founder of PRM, the Personality Reconstruction Matrix. Welcome to Alchemy of Virtues. The whole point of this channel is to bring into English the work of Professor Eduardo Casarotto, the creator of Virtology, and the source of everything you will learn on this channel. Today's question is very simple. Why do modern talk therapy and coaching, the two biggest industries promising lasting change, actually fail for most people who go through them? Let me be clear. There are real exceptions. Some people do transform in therapy. Some people do break through with a coach. Those stories are real, and I respect them. But if you look at what happens to the average person who enters these systems, the picture is very different from what the marketing shows you. The marketing shows you the success stories, the 10% who made it, the glowing testimonial, the polished before and after, the smiling graduate. Well, those stories are real, but they are the exception, not the rule. The people who cycled through 3 therapists and still freeze at their boss's voice, they don't appear in the marketing. The people who paid thousands for a coaching program and are stuck in the exact same loop 2 years later, they don't appear either. The industry quietly drops them from the case studies. I'm not naming names. I don't need to. If you've been around these fields, you already know the pattern. The real question isn't whether these methods sometimes work. It's why do they fail so many people? Once you understand the answer, the whole landscape looks different. Here is what nobody in this industry likes to admit. Walk into any bookstore, the self-help shelves, the popular psychology shelves, the wellness shelves. They are full of books written by coaches and doctors and motivational speakers, filled with emotional story after emotional story of people whose lives were supposedly transformed. Someone depressed for 20 years who healed in 3 months. Someone with daily panic attacks who now leads retreats. Someone who couldn't leave the house and is now a world-famous speaker. These stories are told as if they were the rule, as if this kind of transformation is simply what happens when you do the work, when you read the book, apply the method, and trust the process. But that's not what happens for most people. What actually happens for most people who try these methods is that they can't replicate the results. They try, and they try hard. They journal, they visualize, they meditate, they do the protocol, and nothing structural shifts. And then the real damage begins. Because you didn't get the result the book promised, you start to believe something's wrong with you. Everyone else figured it out. Why didn't you? You must be too broken, too resistant, too damaged, too lazy, too something. Guilt sets in. Shame sets in. Frustration compounds. And now, on top of the original pain, You are carrying a new wound, the belief that you are the problem. I want to be very honest with you. This was my own experience for years before I found the work of Professor Casarotto. I did exactly what these books told me to do, and I failed too. Not because I wasn't trying hard enough. It was because the methods were incomplete, and I had no way to know that. So I blame myself. In a future video on this channel, we'll go deep into what Freud called the emotional sequence, a specific chain reaction with desire, frustration, hostility, destruction, guilt, self-punishment, then the need for reparation. Professor Casarotto integrates this sequence into the Virtology framework and shows how devastating it becomes when it's been pushed through that loop for years by an industry that told you transformation should be easy. If you have lived this cycle, trying, failing, and blaming yourself, please hear me clearly right now. Because what I'm about to say is very important. It was never you. It was the map. Both of these industries rest on an incorrect assumption. Modern talk therapy assumes that if you understand your pain deeply enough, you'll be free of it. Name the wound, interpret the pattern, find meaning in the past, and healing will follow. But here's the problem. A memory isn't a story you can rewrite. A memory is a fixed pattern wired into your brain, a specific circuit that fires the same way every time. Understanding that memory adds a new story on top of the old circuit. It does not change the circuit. That's why smart, self-aware, articulate people can spend 15 years in therapy and still live inside the exact same pattern. The coaching industry, especially what's sold as emotional intelligence or behavioral transformation, assumes the opposite. It assumes you can just install new responses, like updating software. Learn the new behavior, drill it, and you'll become a new person. But your brain doesn't work as one flat system. It works in layers. And a technique that reaches the top layer won't necessarily reach the bottom layer, which is often the one actually running your life. To see why, we have to look at what's inside your head. In his foundational work, Professor Casarotto explains something that anchors everything else on this channel. Your brain has 3 big regions, and they develop one on top of the other over millions of years of evolution. Think of it as a building with 3 floors. The ground floor is the brainstem, what Professor Casarotto also calls the reptilian brain, because we share it with reptiles. This is the oldest part of you. It runs 4 primitive instincts: survival, sexual desire, competition, and protection. When the ground floor is in charge, you are not thinking, you are reacting. It's the famous fight and flight, freeze, grab, defend. Well, the middle floor is the limbic system, your emotional brain. Desire lives here. Fear lives here. Your deepest attachments, your sense of belonging, your oldest emotional memories, they are all stored on this floor. When someone's tone reminds you of your mother's tone from 30 years ago, and your chest tightens before you've consciously connected everything, that's the middle floor running the show. The top floor is the neocortex, and especially the frontal lobe. This is what, in Professor Casarotto's words, makes us truly human. Abstract thinking, ethics, reflection, planning, free will, the capacity to put yourself in someone else's place. Everything we call higher in human life lives here. And here's the key point. These 3 floors don't share the job equally. At any given moment, one of them is in charge. When the ground floor is in charge, You are essentially a reptile with vocabulary. The decision was already made by instinct before your conscious mind showed up. When the middle floor is in charge, feeling and memory are running you. You're not choosing. You're reacting to a pattern encoded years ago. Only when the top floor is in charge are you actually making a conscious choice aligned with who you want to be. And this, which floor is in charge of you most of the time, is what Professor Casarotto calls the evolution bands. Casarotto mapped 7 different bands. For today, I'll group them into 3 zones that line exactly with our 3 floors. The lower zone, primitive and sensation. This is the ground floor running the entire house. Life dominated by survival, impulse, and fear. The reaction happens before the thought. Then the gaze of others take the wheel. Identity built on recognition, conditional generosity, behavior that shifts depending on who's watching. Panic, chronic urgency, obsession with appearance, status, and approval, all of it. They are ground floor symptoms. The intermediate zone, pre-development and partial consciousness. Here, middle floors are fighting the ground floor for control. In pre-development, the person already sees the pattern. They can name it. They can describe it in detail. They teach others what they still don't live, and they keep repeating it. The phrase that defines this band is, "I know, but I don't apply it." They speak from an upper floor and act from the ground floor. This is where most long-term therapy clients and coaching clients actually live. In partial consciousness, the internal struggle becomes real. The person doesn't just know, they want, they try, they succeed in many contexts, and still, under pressure, exhaustion, or fear, they regress to the old version. The phrase of this band is, "I want to, but I still can't." It isn't laziness, it is neuroplasticity in progress. The new pathway hasn't consolidated yet. Now, the upper zone. Feeling, pre-transcendence, ultimate love, and charity. Here, the top floor is finally in charge. Action comes from purpose, not fear. The other person becomes real, not a projection of your needs. Life flows. The struggle isn't the signal anymore. And here's what almost nobody says out loud. Whoever actually lives here doesn't need therapy, doesn't need coaching, doesn't need the next book. The work is done. The building stands. This is exactly the destination the entire self-help industry points to. Every program, every mindset course, every spiritual framework, they are all selling the view from the top floor. Insight, reframing, visualization, manifestation, rewire your brain in 21 days, all of it describing a skyline you can just actually see once the floors beneath you are all built. Because there is no shortcut, there is no magic formula, no reframe takes you from the ground floor to the 5th. It just lets you describe the view from where you already are. The floors have to be constructed. The foundations have to hold. The walls have to carry weight. And that's the part the market won't tell you, because it does not sell well. Now we get to the heart of it. This is where Virtology becomes genuinely revolutionary. Behind all 3 floors, behind every band, Professor Casarotto identifies what he calls the first engine of all neuroses. It's pride. In English, pride has positive meanings. That's not what we're talking about. Pride in Virtology is something very specific. The primitive ground floor need to be important, to be recognized, to matter more than others, to be special, to be validated, to control. It begins biologically as a survival strategy, the brainstem securing status, which in our evolutionary past meant staying inside the group, which meant staying alive. And if it isn't dissolved, it becomes the hidden architect of everything that happens on the middle and top floors too. Here's where most people stop listening, because when they hear pride, they picture the obvious version: arrogance, vanity, the loud narcissist, the social climber, the image obsessed, and they think, that isn't me. But pride has many faces, and some of them are almost impossible to detect. Shyness is pride, not because the shy person wants to feel superior, but because underneath the quiet, there is a mind saying, if I expose myself and I'm criticized, it will be unbearable. Better to stay silent. Better not to try. The shy person isn't humble. The shy person has organized an entire personality around not seeing failing. That's pride wearing a different costume. Shame is pride. The person crushed by humiliation is the person who still believes they should have been perfect. The collapse is the inverted image of the need to be important. Same engine, just a different direction. Self-deprecation is pride. The person who constantly announces how simple they are, how humble they are, how they don't care about expensive clothes or status. They are still announcing. And what we announce, we are asking approval for. I am more important because I am more simple than you. That's still pride, dressed as its opposite. Avoidance is pride. The person who never tries anything new, won't learn the technology, won't start the project, won't take the risk, is protecting an image of themselves that cannot survive failure. The bubble isn't modesty. The bubble is pride refusing exposure. Perfectionism is pride. Control is pride. Chronic comparison is pride. The need to be always right is pride. The inability to apologize is pride. The compulsion to explain yourself is pride. Now look at what a huge part of the coaching industry sells. Success, visibility, being special, standing out, 6 figures, 7 figures, personal branding, influence. Do you see what's happening? That industry isn't dissolving pride, it's feeding it while calling it growth. And talk therapy has a different problem. Understanding your pride is a top floor activity. Pride lives on the ground floor. You can analyze your pride for 20 years and still be run by it, because insight and dissolution happen on different floors. Neither model names pride clearly. Neither has a protocol to dissolve it. And neither teaches what Professor Casarotto teaches. What defends you, destroys you. So, Professor Casarotto did something nobody else in modern psychology had done. He named pride and egoism as the 2 primitive roots of all neuroses. He mapped the 7 evolution bands and showed how they line up with the brain's 3 floors. And he identified 33 virtues, specific neural competencies you can train, that, developed in the right order and at the right band, progressively dissolves pride and egoism and move the person's center of gravity up through the floors. And here's the part that, for me personally, settled it. He didn't build this in a university office. He built in the hardest possible field. For 6 years, Professor Casarotto worked directly inside the Brazilian prison system with inmates, with former inmates, and with their families. Part of this work was documented on film. The men who went through it described reconciliations with their families after decades of rupture, measurable drops in violent behavior. The phrase that kept coming back was, "If I had learned this earlier, I wouldn't be here." In education, Virtology has been approved by Brazil's Federal Fund for Educational Development and is now implemented across the entire public school system of the city of São João del Rei. A research project applying Virtology with children won first place at a National Health Congress. When a framework works in a Brazilian prison, in public schools, and with children from shelters, populations almost every conventional method has quietly failed. You are no longer looking at a theory. You are looking at a science of reconstruction. Now I want to say something very important about what Virtology is, because it's often misunderstood. Virtology is not claiming that everything that came before it was wrong. That would be arrogant and honestly untrue. The psychoanalytic tradition, Freud, Jung, Klein, Lacan, it gave us an extraordinary map of the unconscious. Behavioral approaches gave us rigorous tools from changing what can be trained on the top floor. Modern neuroscience has given us a detailed picture of how the brain actually works. And even quantum physics is beginning to describe phenomena, interconnectedness, the observer effect, the relationship between consciousness and reality, that mystical and spiritual traditions have been pointing to for thousands of years. One of the 33 virtues Professor Casarotto identifies is oneness. It names exactly what science is slowly beginning to describe, that everything is, at the deepest level, connected. What Professor Casarotto did is integrate. He takes what is genuinely valuable in each of these traditions and places it inside a single coherent framework anchored by two things nobody else had put at the center: the evolution bands and pride and egoism as primitive roots. This is why Virtology isn't the same category as a technique or a method. It's a paradigm, one that respects what each tradition got right, while showing why no single one of them alone can produce reliable transformation. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's combining the best of everything that actually works and adding the missing pieces. That's the magic, and it happens through PRM. So what is PRM? PRM, the Personality Reconstruction Matrix, is the clinical and educational architecture I built on top of Virtology, specifically to bring this work to an international patient population. Virtology is pillar 1 of PRM, its foundational pillar. Everything PRM does rests on Professor Casarotto's architecture. Let me tell you what actually happens when someone comes to work with PRM. There are 4 things we do, and none of them is one size fits all. First, we identify which evolution band you are actually living in. Not where you want to be, not where you tell yourself you are. Where the behavior data actually places you, day after day, and under pressure. Second, we map your specific level of pride, what shape it takes in you, what it disguises itself as in your life, where it hides on each of the 3 floors of your brain. Third, we work with the virtues as what they actually are, moral competencies, not religious ideas, not spiritual platitudes. Virtues as trainable neural competencies, each one a specific skill, each one with measurable levels of development, each one linked to a specific structure in the brain. We'll go deep into exactly what this means in future videos on this channel. Fourth, we map the architecture of your personality and build the protocol that fits you, not the generic protocol, not the version that worked for someone else's case study. The right protocol for your specific band, your specific level of pride, your specific virtue deficits, your specific personality structure. That last point is where PRM diverges sharply from almost every other approach on the market. PRM is not one size fits all. It is structurally the opposite. Each patient receives a reconstruction blueprint built for them, anchored by the Access Protocol as the central structure, and delivered through MEA, which means mapping, embodiment, and action. Diagnostic, teaching, and practice, case by case. That's what PRM does, and this is what Virtology makes possible. So let's come back to where we started. If you've spent decades in therapy and feel structurally the same, if you've done every coaching program and the pattern keeps returning, if you've read every book and still blame yourself for not transforming the way those books promised, please hear this one more time. There was never anything wrong with you. The map was incomplete. In the coming videos on this channel, we'll go deeper into every piece of this. Pride in all its disguises, the emotional sequence and the damage it does, the 33 virtues, one at a time as specific moral competencies, each evolution band, how the Access and MEA work in clinical practice, and how Virtology converges with neuroscience, quantum physics, and the spiritual traditions that science is only now beginning to validate. Professor Eduardo Casarotto is the creator of Virtology and the source of every foundational concept on this channel. Links to his work are in the description of every video. My clinical practice, the PRM, is at alchemyofvirtues.com. If something you heard today named a pattern you've been carrying for years, there is a discovery session option on the side. Subscribe if you've been waiting for a language for this. Now you have one. Welcome to Alchemy of Virtues.